Yes, it's time to go through the papers now. So joining us this morning, Chief Executive of Demos think tank and former advisor to Nick Clegg, Polly Mackenzie, and joining us also author and academic Joanna Williams. Have I got that right?
Yes.
Good.
Have.
Thank you. Because I wasn't sure about the spellings.
All right.
Right. Well, who are we starting with? Joanna. And yes, we're talking about the Rwanda migrants, of course, again, and whether or not anyone thinks it's a humane policy and whether it's going to work as well.
Well, those are very, very big questions. And on the surface, this is a completely kind of madcap idea of shipping people back across over to Africa, back to over to Rwanda. It's obviously been very, very widely criticised. You'll see in lots of the newspapers today, there's some very heavy criticisms being levied at this. People are pointing out the inhumanity of treating people this way. But I would argue we do need to think carefully about solutions to this problem. We've got record numbers of people coming over on small boats through the channel in that way. It's a deadly trade. You know, people are putting their lives at risk by entering on these small boats. And a lot of the criticisms are not actually putting forward solutions to this problem.
This is as much as anything else, this is what people don't focus on this is a deterrent.
Well, exactly. And two other things I think are really worth pointing out. One is that the UK is not the first country in Europe to use offshore processing for migrants. Denmark has proposals in place to send migrants outside of the EU for processing. And actually, the EU itself has been paying Libya money for years now to hold detention centres hosting migrants to stop people coming across the Mediterranean to enter the EU in the first place. And you look at some of those conditions in those camps in Libya, I mean, they are absolutely appalling, whereas many of the critics of this scheme now of shipping people back to Rwanda, you know, very rarely have much to say about those camps in Libya or about what's going on in Denmark.
So the reality is with this, Polly, criticism there might be, we're actually a bit slow off the mark.
Well, I think it's important to be clear that we're not proposing to offshore refugee processing.
No.
We're proposing to send people to go and claim asylum in Rwanda. And that's quite different from the idea that you process people and then accept their claim if they're found, so that you don't have to have people onshore and the hassle of removing failed asylum seekers. And the government's been quite ambiguous about that, but the reality is this is not offshoring. It's telling people you can't claim asylum here because you arrived on a boat. You have to claim asylum in Rwanda, completely different country, other side of the world. I think that there's no question that everything, basically, that happens to refugees is inhumane. You're absolutely true that lots of refugee camps are incredibly difficult environments for people, that people trafficking is an abhorrent crime which exploits some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And what disappoints me is that there's so little attempt to actually think about the whole system of what's going wrong in the world here. I would like to see Britain show some leadership of that kind. The reality is about 10 million people flee their home because of war or persecution every year. And that's going to be higher this year because of Ukraine. And this country is a brilliant country that lots of people want to come to because we have a really diverse population. We need to think about, what does refugee settlement look like in an unstable world? How do we allow as many people as possible to stay close to their country of origin? And how do we allow safe routes for people who have a legitimate tie to the UK to come here? That's how you deal with people traffickers, not taking a couple of 10,000 people, moving them over to Rwanda to be another client group for people traffickers, which is precisely what happened when Israel used Rwanda as a place to send their asylum seekers. Is they all just got straight back in on the buses and the coaches and the trains and straight up to North Africa to try and claim again.
I think certainly there are global problems, but ultimately in Britain we can only deal with the situation as we have it in Britain.
A third of the population of Lebanon is a refugee, right?
Absolutely.
So the scale of the problem
A third
for
of the population is
it's absolutely massive.
But if national borders are to mean anything at all,
agree.
then we do have to actually defend our national borders. Otherwise we're just saying, well, it's a free-for-all. I think we also need to have a lot more honesty in the debate. So you're saying, Polly, that lots of people want to come here because of the diversity of our population. I think actually a lot of people want to come here because we have a good economy as well, and there are plentiful work opportunities for people. And I think actually if people are fleeing persecution, then Rwanda is a safe country at the moment. Rwanda is not a war zone. And if people are economic migrants, then I think you're right. People will be desperate and carry on persevering to come here. But kind of sometimes we dress this debate up as if everybody's fleeing a war. And that's absolutely not the case. I think we do need to acknowledge that there are a large proportion.
How are we going to decide?
70% of those who cross the Channel have their asylum claim found as successful. So, of course, there are economic migrants, and I completely agree that everything about those channel crossings is horrific and it needs to be prevented. But my view is that you prevent that by having safe routes. At a global level, we all need to take our responsibility. We're a rich country.
But come on, you couldn't even agree with the French on how to cope with everybody in Calais.
No, that's because we've decided that we don't like the French anymore, and we want to, and because we've got this idea that if once you're in France, you shouldn't be allowed to come to the United Kingdom, even though France has more refugees per head of the population than we have. Understandably, I think the French feel that that's a bit unfair.
But it is a bit idealistic, especially at the moment, isn't it? Expecting countries to agree on how to deal with refugees worldwide.
What's the alternative?
An immediate decision like this.
Well, yeah, but the alternative is actually designing a system to cope with the reality that about 10 million people are displaced every year. Like,
it ain't going to happen, is it? I mean, let's be realistic.
Well, why not?
That ain't going to happen.
The United Kingdom, they managed to torch it up, but started to put together a global campaign under our Global Britain banner on LGBT rights. Yeah? Trying to get global leadership, trying to take our position and our values and make the case for other people to do that. We hosted COP26, trying to get other countries to agree to a better system for managing climate change. We have trade conferences all the time. Why can't we actually start a process of collaboration between nations to work out who should take these challenges?
COP26 went really well.
Well, yeah, it was actually.
It's not achieving immediate. But it's not achieving immediate change, and it wouldn't here. We need something to happen immediately.
Yeah, okay, so at a cost, we absolutely do. Personally, I would prioritise a deal with France over this, which I think is just going to be ruinously expensive.
But I think the problem is loads of deals have been done with France already, and it's clearly not changed anything because
we don't offer any safe routes. We've taken a view, and others will share that.
What about listening to
We've taken a view that if you're in France, you shouldn't be allowed to come to the
people on
United
this
Kingdom.
one? And this is what this government was meant to be about, wasn't it? Listening to the people. Leslie says Boris has made a brilliant decision. Morning, Leslie. We watched his speech and the live video. We can't keep the illegal immigrant. We can't let the illegal immigration continue the way it is. Philip says, I like this plan of sending them to Rwanda for processing. If it stops the people traffickers making money, it's good.
I think the problem with your suggestion, Polly, about making these international global treaties is it actually takes this decision about migration away from the British public. And if we think of Britain as a democratic nation state, it should be for the people of Britain to decide who comes to live here or who doesn't come to live here. And I think the situation in Ukraine has shown that the British people are actually incredibly compassionate when it comes to migration. But if you suggest some kind of global treaty, we no longer have the power to make those decisions in this country, and that's why I'd really object to it. It should be a national decision. It should be
a national decision to take our share of, a fundamental problem. If you're a rich country, America has this, a rich country near a poor country has the constant pressure of migration.
But we're not near a poor country, we're near France and Ireland.
But we are surrounded by a world in which there is huge amounts of conflict. And absolutely, we should be making our decisions about who to take. We should be making our decisions about how you contribute to reducing conflict, to economic development, and to managing safe routes. But my view is that you will reduce the pressure of people trafficking if you provide safe routes and if you provide much more support than I think we do to those countries which neighbour war zones or disaster zones or famine areas and enable them to accommodate refugees, because most refugees want to stay close to their country of origin because they have aspirations to stay at home.
That's going to involve long-term funding, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whereas the idea about about
We're
this
a rich country in an unstable
something done
world.
now.
This might be expensive in the short term, but the idea is if it does act as a deterrent, then it's not going to necessarily be a long term.
But the fact is, we're never going to level up the economy of every single country in the world. I mean, that's an incredibly idealistic statement that you've come out with there. There will always be rich countries and poor people.
Can I just say...
There will always be people in poor countries who want to leave to go to rich.
Let's leave that at the moment, because we are going to obviously have to revisit later on. And just ask you very, very quickly, Partygate fatigue. 2 in 3 people want to move on from Partygate.
God, I'd love to move on from Partygate, but I think that you do that by actually admitting mistakes, not trying to pretend that the only thing that went wrong was a 9-minute cake in a Tupperware container.
They've apologised, haven't they?
Well, they apologised, but then also sent out lots of briefing that, it wasn't me, Gov, it's really unfair, the Metropolitan Police. You know, I think that the reality is that the culture is set from the top, and the Prime Minister wasn't interested in understanding the rules that he passed. Extraordinary measures to restrain our freedom, very controversial, and he didn't know he was breaking them because he didn't bother to read and learn the rules that he had imposed on other people.
OK, you want to move on from Partygate, but you're still talking about it.
Yes.
And Joanna, do you want to move on from Partygate?
I desperately want to move on from Partygate, and the reason why I want to move on from Partygate is that it wasn't really the parties that were the problem, it was the rules that were the problem. And, you know, you had the Labour Party standing up in Parliament begging the government to go further. You had journalists in those press briefings begging the government to go further, and now people are turning around and saying, oh, but it was the parties that were the problem. Do you know what? It wasn't the fact that Boris was having a party in Downing Street that stopped people attending funerals, seeing sick relatives in hospital. It was the rules. And I would love it if all the people who are now so busy criticising the hypocrisy of Partygate had been so vocal at the time to criticise the inhumanity of those rules that we were all expected to live under, and they weren't.
We've got to leave it there. Joanna Williams, Polly Mackenzie, thank you both. Catch up a little bit later on.